here Hugh O'Connell from the Journal. Hugh is the political editor with the Journal, and he's going to talk to you today about the difference between reporting for print, broadcasting and online journalism. He's also going to talk to you about the pressures that are on people who are working for online publications, because generally the pressure is they have to get it out first. He studied in John Moore's University in Liverpool, which is a very famous journalism college, and worked after that with BBC4 and with FIFA and News Talk. He's going to talk to you about that. He tells me he's also a Liverpool football supporter, so I'd say the work with FIFA was probably a passion as well as a job. So he works continuously with John Moore's University as well, helping them with their online publication. And he's basically going to talk to you about working in the Dáil, trying to generate political stories, and give you some advice about how to get started working in online journalism. As you know, we've been all talking about this. It's where the future of a lot of jobs in journalism are. So when he's finished talking to you, he's going to show you some examples of stories that he wrote, maybe talk about the time constraints in delivering those stories, and then we'll throw it over to the floor and you can ask him some questions. So would you give him a warm welcome, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. Thank you. I suppose Mary told you a little bit about me. So I've been at the Journal for about 3 years now, 3.5 years, and I became political editor about 7 months ago, so you'll have to bear with me because it's still a role I'm coming to terms with. I mean, the journal.ie is traditional in many ways. It's a newsroom in the traditional sense, but obviously because we're a lot smaller in terms of an operation. I mean, when I started there, we were 5 people effectively. Now we're about 35 between news, sports, entertainment, and our technical team, and our management team, and our commercial team. But so we're still relatively small when you think about, I mean, somewhere like the Mail, I think, is 150, 170 people. So we have to be kind of agile, and we have to pick and choose how we cover events. But we're always thinking about whether we need to go out to an event with video cameras, or can we do a vox pop on a certain thing. We don't always go to every press conference. We don't always go to every launch. We don't always go to every crime scene. We have to pick and choose what we think we're going to cover. So we have to be pretty smart about that. And the way you're going to become smart about that is through experience of working there. It's really the only way that you pick it up. We're a mobile-first operation, which means that the desktop, which was up there a few minutes ago, most people don't read us on their laptops or on their desktops. They read us on their phone, on their commute into work every morning, on their commute home at night, or when they're sitting on the couch watching Coronation Street. They might log on to the Journal. Like, the statistics show us this, that our mobile app is probably one of the, I think it is in fact, the biggest news app in the country. And we're a mobile-first operation, which means that when we're writing a story, when we're producing a story, we have to think about, does this picture look good on a tiny screen this size? Is this video going to play on mobile app, or are there some restrictions on it which mean it'll only play when it's on desktop? So we have to think about these things all the time, and we have to think about these when we're producing stories. And other things as well, like graphs or bar charts and things like that. You might not see a graph very well on there. You will see it good on there, but can we make the graph bigger? Things like that. So we have to think like a mobile-first operation. And I think that's something that you guys will have to think about as well, that when you're going to work in news organisations, you won't necessarily work at the Journal, or you might work at the Irish Times, but I would like to think, and other news organisations in this country are thinking that way as well, that the way people consume news has completely changed in the last 5 years with the advent of basically this, the smartphone. People don't buy newspapers anymore. That's the reality of it. If you look at the ABC ones, or the ABCs, I mean, they're falling every year, every 6 months. Fewer people are buying newspapers. That's the reality of it, because they're going online, they're using their phone, they're going on their computer, whatever. But just because the medium has changed doesn't mean that the basic journalistic principles don't apply. Like I'll show you an example of a couple of stories in a few minutes. But I mean, a lot of people kind of, focus on, well, what does the journal do with social media, Twitter and Facebook and things like that. If somebody's tweeting about something at events that, there's a bomb gone off outside my house, or I've heard an explosion, or like last night in Wexford, there was this tremor that people were feeling. Apparently it was some sort of earthquake. You have to investigate that in the same way as you would investigate it if you got a call into a newsroom at 12 o'clock at night. You apply the same journalistic principles. You talk to people on the ground. You ask the people who reported, can they give you any more information? Do they know who I can speak to about that? Have you got a picture that you can send us in? Normally, if it's something that's going on outside their house or somewhere where they're in the vicinity, they'll be able to send a picture in and tell you a little, and tell you, what's the when was this picture taken and what's going on in the picture. So, but you have to apply the checks. You can't, if you see a picture on Twitter, someone's tweeted a picture, you can't just throw it up on thejournal.ie, you can't just throw it up on any news website, or any reputable news organisation can't just publish that photo. They have to provide, they have to put in place the checks and balances in terms of, is the photo real, is it authentic, who took it, have you got the permission to use it, because otherwise you'll be getting an invoice that you weren't expecting. So, and other things as well. I'll show you the example in a minute, but when Brian Lenihan died in 2011, the former finance minister, there was at least 3 times where someone on Twitter said he had died because he'd been suffering from cancer for quite some time. Now, every time we had to go and check that rumour. We couldn't rely on that story being true just because someone on Twitter put it up. And in fact, on the day he did die, Dermot Looney, a South Dublin County Councillor, tweeted to that effect. Now, Dermot Looney's a nice guy, he's a reputable guy, he's normally very well sourced on these things. It transpired that he was right, but just because Dermot Looney said it didn't mean that he was right. So we had to go and make the checks. We had to ring people who were close to Brian Lenihan, sources close to him, and we could confirm the story.
And how did you confirm it? Who did you actually talk to?
But you talk to the same people that you talk to for any story you're trying to confirm. Are there people close to Brian Lenihan that you can get in touch with? In the first instance, his press officer. The second instance, his constituency office, things that way. Do you know someone who knows Brian Lenihan? Do you know a family member? This kind of thing. You're applying the same journalistic checks and balances as you would if you were working in a newspaper, or if you were working for RTE. The same principles apply. Another thing people say about online is that online has ruined investigative journalism. That's not true. I'm going to show you a couple of stories that we've done, investigations we've done. One of them quite recently, in fact. Into organisations that these are investigations that have taken time, they've taken weeks. We've had to speak to dozens of people about them, but we've managed to get the story out there. You still have to invest time in journalism. You still have to apply the same journalistic principles of speaking to people, of researching stories, of reading reports or whatever. Just because the medium has changed doesn't mean that the basic principles don't apply. And people say as well that long-form journalism, 2,000, 3,000 word articles, you never get them online, you never read them online. People don't invest their time in producing that kind of stuff for online. Not true. I'll show you another example in a minute, but people are interested in reading long-form journalism, because the way they consume their news is changing in some ways, but not in others. They might only have half an hour on the train or the bus in the morning to tap into the 9 at 9, or to read the latest news headlines, or to listen to the news briefly on Morning Ireland or News Talk. But at the weekend they might have a bit of time, and instead of going out for a newspaper, they might get their tablet open, or they might get their smartphone, and they might read a nice long-form piece. I'll show you one in a few minutes. But there is scope for doing that in online as well. So you have to think that all the things you're probably learning about here, a lot of it will come, and I'm sure you won't begrudge me for saying this, but a lot of people who are probably teaching you here come from newspaper backgrounds. Yeah. And they're giving you good stuff in terms of training and of things that you need to know about journalism. But the medium is changing, the way that people are consuming news is changing. So you have to be thinking about that all the time. So I work in politics. I'm the political editor of the Journal. I'm actually the first online-only person in news journalist accredited in Leinster House. It's not something that it's just occurred to me yesterday that that's the case. But I operate in a different way to the way perhaps traditional news outlets would. There are newspapers down there who have 2 or 3 people there, and they're there permanently, and that's fair enough. Don't begrudge them that. They get good stories. But I get good stories as well, and I get good stories from being conscious of the fact that I can't invest all my time in Leinster House, because I have to think about the things that are going on back in the office, and journalists who I have some sort of direction over, that I can kind of talk to and say that we need to cover this story or that story. So I spend my time in Leinster House wisely, in terms of I go in there if I have meetings or if I have contacts that I need to touch base with. Sometimes, as I was telling Mary earlier, I strategically roam the corridors of Leinster House, because you bump into people. and you strike up a relationship with them, a rapport with them. Again, that's an old journalistic principle of building up your contacts, and I apply that just as much as any other journalist would. But I have to think about using my time wisely, because it is time pressure, and that's another big point. The Journal established its reputation in the first instance on breaking news fast. If there was something happening, if you heard something on the radio, chances are you logged on to the Journal, we had something up on it. And that's how we established our reputation for breaking news. We were fast and active. You'd read something on the Journal before you might read it on RT or the Irish Times. And there's a huge pressure that comes with that, both for us, but also for other news outlets, because we find now that the likes of the Independent, RT and the Irish Times, they're doing the same thing. They're beating us on breaking some stories, we're beating them, and it's a competition. But that's the way it is in reality, because people, this has made everything instantaneous. When they log on to Twitter or they log on to their their Facebook, they want to be seeing what's the latest news, what's going on in the world. And we have to be conscious of that all the time, in terms of if there's a story breaking, we need to get it out there fast, and then we've got to take a step back and think about the context, well, what does this, and I'll show you some other examples of, well, what does this story mean as part of the, the bigger picture of things, just as well with politics, the other thing as well is that, there's always the kind of the story of the week in terms of politics. If you think of the recent stories, like the whole controversy surrounding Alan Shatter and the Garda Ombudsman and the Garda whistleblowers, we followed that on a daily basis in terms of what were the latest developments with that story. What had Alan Shatter said about this, or who was calling for Alan Shatter to resign today. But we also have to think about the context of it. We have to think about, well, people might not necessarily follow, the fact that Sinn Féin has on Tuesday called for Alan Shatter to resign, and then Fianna Fáil is not quite saying that he should resign. People want to know, well, why is everyone going on about Alan Shatter? What's he done? So we have to tap into that in terms of, what are the things that, what are the things that put Alan Shatter on the news agenda? Why is he under pressure? Why are people talking about him resigning? And so we did a piece on that. We basically said, here's why Alan Shatter's under pressure, and this is why he's resigning, or why he's under pressure to resign. And you go through it step by step in terms of explaining to people, the bare basics of the story, the bare bones of the story. To someone like me, it's kind of like telling them stuff that I kind of know off the top of my head. But you have to be conscious of the fact that your readers are only tuning in and out of this thing now and again. They're only seeing a tweet, or they're only hearing something on the radio briefly. So you have to be aware in politics, I find particularly, of what's the context. What's the bigger picture? What does it all mean, and what's going to happen? That's it. I'm going to show you a few stories, but just in terms of kind of advice, and we'll do Q&A now. I hope you all got some good questions, and I'll answer as many as I can. But in terms of advice, if you want to kind of be a journalist in this day and age, be on Twitter. Is everyone here got a Twitter account? If you don't, get on Twitter. And don't just sign up for Twitter and tell me about what you had for breakfast. Engage with Twitter. Follow the Journal first of all, but then follow RT News, Reuters, Agence Presse, Associated Press, Irish Times. Follow that, but then follow their journalists. So follow me, obviously. But follow other political journalists, or follow other kind of public affairs journalists, social affairs journalists, crime reporters, court reporters. Follow them, because increasingly people are using Twitter as a tool of breaking news. People are tweeting from the Anglotron. Journalists are tweeting from the Anglotron, including our journalists, are tweeting from the Anglotron. You have to be careful. Mary was a bit shocked, I think, earlier when I said that, I think people should be tweeting from the courts. You have to apply the same principles that you would to anything you were covering down the courts. That if the jury's not in the room, well, then you can't report it. Similarly, if the jury's not in the room, well, then you can't tweet about it. It's the same thing. But people are tweeting now from courtrooms. I tweet from the Public Accounts Committee when I cover that. And people are using Twitter both as a kind of a news gathering tool in terms of, well, what are people saying on Twitter? What's the politician saying on Twitter? In my kind of area of expertise. But I'm also using it to deliver news. To say that Enda Kenny has said at this press conference that, I don't know, we're going to leave the euro or something like that. If I tweeted that on Twitter, it'd be a huge story, and the same as if anyone else tweeted it on Twitter. You have to be right, though. If I tweeted that and it wasn't true at all, well, then my reputation would go down the pan. So your Twitter profile is not just about being on Twitter for the sake of being on Twitter. You have to engage on it. Things like Twitter lists as well are really good in terms of, I have a list of all the 166 TDs in the Dáil. I have a list of all the 24 senators in the Dáil on Twitter, and I check in with those lists on a daily basis to see what politician is saying about what. I mean, if you think about some of the kind of the big tweets in the past, I mean, I remember in 2011, the general election, Paul Gogherty conceded on Twitter about half an hour after the ballot boxes had been opened in terms of he accepted he lost his seat. Similarly, I think the Shamond referendum, Kevin Humphreys, the Labour TD, tweeted that the referendum had been lost, you know, about an hour after the boxes had been opened. You know, news happens and news breaks on Twitter increasingly, and you all have to be aware of that. I think it's absolutely crucial. Throw yourself into everything and anything that comes your way. Take up every opportunity that comes your way in terms of journalism. Meet other journalists, you know, ask to go for a coffee with them. Strike up a relationship with them, because then they'll think at the back of their mind, I'm looking for someone to do this, or, you know, I've got a few shifts at this, or at this, you know, newspaper or news outlet that I'm working at. And they might think of you, you know. So don't be afraid to ask journalists for advice. I mean, you're in a brilliant position at the moment because you're trying to get into the industry. So you can go along to a journalist and say, you know, I'm just looking for a bit of advice, you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, send them an email, give them a phone call, whatever. Tweet them even, you know, send them a direct message on Twitter. One of the other things as well is just inhale news, you know, read the news, watch the news, listen to the news, you know. It's absolutely essential that you know, if you want to work in this country, you got to listen to Morning Ireland every morning. It's the agenda setting program, you know. News happens, you know. Politicians go on Morning Ireland to announce things, you know. Stories break there. It's the same in the UK, you know, the Today programme on Radio 4 is hugely influential. You have to be tuned into these things. You have to know what's setting the agenda for the day if you want to work in a modern news environment. You have to read around, you know. I get up every morning, I read the Irish Times, I read the Independent, I read the Examiner, I read, you know, the tabloids when I get into the office. I listen to Morning Ireland. You have to be aware of what's going on in the world. I have a lot of knowledge about politics, but that's because I've inhaled politics, you know. I've read everything I can get my hands on, I've listened to everything I can get my hands on, you know, that kind of thing. I've watched the bulletins and all of that. You build up a background knowledge that helps you in your reporting, that helps you put context on a story, that helps you decide whether that's actually a story or that's not really a story, or, you know, should I be speaking to that person about this story. So, you know, knowledge is power, I find, in this industry. Like, the more you know, the more chance you have of getting ahead. The other thing as well, just finally, is kind of, you know, be tenacious, ask questions, you know, challenge authority, don't take no for an answer. A lot of people come in here and say that probably, but it's absolutely true. You know, you don't get anywhere in life by kind of being a shrinking violet or not being prepared to make the phone call and ask the awkward question. I mean, particularly in politics, the amount of times I've had to get on the phone and ask really awkward questions of politicians I get on quite well with, you know, but I got to say, well, look, I got to burn you on this, or I got to ask you this question because, you know, this is the allegation or the charge is being made against you, and I have to get an answer from you. Like, and, you know, don't take no for an answer in terms of, or, you know, don't take no comment for an answer. You know, challenge people, you know, challenge authority. So I think that's it. I want to show you a couple of stories. But I mean, you know, just because somebody said it on Twitter doesn't mean it's true. So we had to, I mean, we were one of the first news outlets, as I remember, to break this story. And we had to make the checks and balances, you know, we had to speak to people who were close to him, you know, and sometimes we had to ring people and say, can I quote you on that? And they would say no. I mean, that's another thing as well, that sometimes, you know, they won't go on the record, but if you can get enough people to confirm it off the record, 2 or 3 separate sources, then that usually does it for you, you know, that's the kind of the thing you had to do in that case. I was talking about long form stories. You know, this is an 8,000 word piece that we did on the bank guarantee to mark the 5th anniversary in 2013. I kind of led the way on this piece, but as you see, a number of reporters contributed to it. This took about 8 weeks to put together. We spoke to a lot of people. We spoke to Eamon Ryan, we spoke to John Burton. But, you know, we couldn't speak to Brian Lenihan, but we went back to his evidence that he gave before the Oireachtas Committee in 2010, I think it was. And that provided the kind of context where we can tell the story of the kind of weeks and months leading up to the bank guarantee. And, you know, it's not just big blocks of text. We have to think about, you know, what kind of stories would be, what kind of pictures would be relevant to the story that we can include. So, I mean, people remember maybe that Northern Rock, the British bank, went down in the months leading up to our banks going kaput as well. You know, and there was Irish Nationwide, and you see, we build it up, and we build it up in their voices rather than our voices. But you can see the point I'm trying to make, really. And I mean, there's a video of Lehman Brothers going under as well, the Sky News report at the time. The point I'm making really is that there is a scope for long-form journalism and for this kind of thing online as well. You know, people think that you can only read your kind of in-depth analysis pieces in the Sunday newspapers. That's just not the case. Again, I spoke about this one, the whole Alan Shatter controversy. You know, we had to try and tap into that in terms of, like, we're reporting on this Shatter story on a daily basis, but you know, why people might want to know, you know, well, what does it all go back to? You know, why is Alan Shatter actually under pressure? So again, we kind of laid it out in detail. You know, we had links back to the previous stories. You know, we linked here back to the kind of reporting that we did on a continuous basis on the story. And you know, again, we broke it up in pictures in terms of that, and subheads and things like that. But you know, it was kind of getting to the point of why Alan Shatter is under pressure and explaining it to people in kind of a detailed way, so that when they hear about Alan Shatter the next morning on Morning Island, then they'll know, well, I know why he's under pressure, you know. And just in terms of politics, I have to kind of concentrate on delivering politics in a different way. You know, so I did some reporting from the Fine Gael Ordesh, and I'll be doing some from the Fianna Fáil Ordesh this weekend. But at the end of it, you know, people aren't going to be following, you know, minute-by-minute coverage of the Fine Gael Ordesh on Friday and Saturday, unless they're really sad like me. So, you know, I had to put a bit of context on it in terms of, you know, well, what actually did we learn at the Fine Gael Ordesh? You know, what did Enda Kenny say? What did Michael Noonan say? You know, was Alan Shatter, you know, was he given a warm reception? Well, of course he was. You know, it's his own party. So, you know, we have to put a bit of fun into it as well in terms of lots of people were taking selfies at the Fine Gael Ordesh, so I kind of, you know, copped onto that and put something in there. So there's John Bruton. So, you know, this is an easy way of kind of delivering, you know, the kind of, here's what you need to know about what happened at the Fine Gael Ordesh, so that if you weren't following, you know, on Twitter, kind of minute by minute, you know, this motion was voted through and that motion wasn't voted through, that you were at least able to read this piece and be kind of clued up as to what happened. Similarly, when Martin Callanan appeared before the Garda Commissioner, appeared before the Public Accounts Committee in January, and he said that the actions of the Garda whistleblowers were disgusting, that obviously created a lot of headlines at the time, and still very contentious remarks. But that was a very long committee hearing, I think it was about 5 hours. So at the end of it, like, you know, again, unless you're sad like me, or you're one of the people on the committee, you probably weren't following what was going on there. But I was able to provide the kind of context to it in terms of these are the things that we learned from Martin Callanan at the Public Accounts Committee. You know, so it's just providing that kind of easy, digestible form of news. But you know, that's not to say that it has to be 200, 300 words. You can actually do quite a bit on it. You know, I'd say that's probably about 1,200 words. One last thing, in terms of investigations, I don't know, you might have heard about this story about students being taken together by the risks in sex education taught by the Catholic youth group. Pure in Heart, I think they're called. This is a really good story that our reporter Michelle Hennessy did last month. And there's been a number of follow-ups on this in terms of other students getting in touch with her and telling her about all the kind of odd things that this Pure in Heart group were doing during these talks that they were giving in schools around the country. And Michelle spent a lot of time on this, and there were a lot of legal issues with it, but it was a good piece of journalism, so we managed to get it out there. And there was a lot of pickup on it. I know Sean O'Rourke on his programme did a lot of big half-an-hour item on it. I know Drive Time have been following it as well. And we, you know, as well, the newspapers picked up on it too. So, you know, there is scope for investigations. You know, Michelle had to take a lot of time on this story, but, you know, just because you're working in an online, fast-paced environment where it is important to break the story first doesn't mean that you can't actually step back now and again and put your time and effort into working on stories like these, because they are good stories. That's pretty much it for me, so I'm happy to take questions if you have any. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, I think the one thing I learned from that here was, again, and I suppose the idea that you are given time and that you can do good investigative pieces and do good analysis as well. As you're saying, you're probably telling the story in a different way, the way you did the backgrounder on Alan Shatter, and also you know, the whole story about the commissioner and what does it mean and who are the whistleblowers and where did it come from. So there's probably a different slant on what would be the big difference, say, for you between the work you did previously as a journalist and how did you have to think differently when you went into the journal? What did you not do that you did? Research jobs?
Yeah, well, they were research jobs. They were working on radio shows. So you were talking about lining up guests, you were talking about writing lengthy, detailed briefs that weren't going to be read by anyone except the presenters or the producers. So you didn't have to put as much kind of time and effort into making it attractive to the ordinary reader. So you have to think a lot about how you're going to deliver a story and how you're going to make it readable for people. Why are people going to click into this story? We have to think a lot about headlines in the journal, because you do in newspapers as well when you think about it. Because when you open a newspaper, what attracts you to read a particular story? It's the headline, and so it's the same online as well. You have to think about, if I'm scrolling down, we call it the river, like our list of stories. What's the kind of headline that's going to attract people in? So you have to think about. That's pretty self-explanatory, obviously. That's bizarre, I think. And if it is as bizarre as that, then you think that people are probably going to click into it. But similarly, the 8 things we learned at the Fine Gael Ordesh, or 11 things we learned from Martin Callan at the PSC, it's self-explanatory. I know that if I'm going to click into this story, I'm going to learn about what happened at the Fine Gael Ordesh, and that's the point of the story, isn't it? Whereas, if you were reading in the Irish Times, perhaps they'll kind of say, well, the cannabis legalisation, same-sex marriage discussed at Fine Gael Ordesh, being brutally honest, it's the way you package it.
Yes.
Being brutally honest, that's not half as sexy as 8 things we learned at the Fine Gael Ordesh. But so that's it's thinking about the packaging of it, but it's also thinking about as well, what are the good pictures I could include in this? So you'll see in the Fine Gael thing that I showed you, there was some cool pictures in there of Enda Kenny giving the thumbs up and all that kind of stuff.
I'm just interested because we're doing webcasting with the students now later on in the year. Do you do your own videos as well? Do you bring the camera along
the scope for doing
Frank
videos
has there, is it?
Yeah.
So you're all video journalists as well, are you?
Yeah, and we all have iPads, which we can take along to events, and we can shoot a bit of video in terms of if Enda Kenny is doing a doorstep, we can shoot a video of that. Or, a lot of the stuff we do with video, we're still trying to figure it out because I don't think anyone's cracked it. I think that there isn't a huge amount of merit to going down and videoing a press conference. If you can just report on it in a text way. We find that the videos that go viral on the journal are things like when, in fact, I'll show you maybe later, when Angus O'Snuddig, the Sinn Féin TD, said "amazy balls" in the Dáil, we picked up on that video very quickly, and once we got it up there was huge traction on that because people couldn't believe that this TD was saying "amazy balls." He actually meant to say "amaze balls" in the Dáil chamber. It was so bizarre. So we find that the kind of videos sometimes are actually videos of what's happening in the Dáil. Particularly in my sphere of working. But in terms of going out and doing video and going out with a camera and things like that, there is a merit to it. But it's all about what is the thing that you're videoing. And I also would say that if it's a 2 or 3 minute video, no one's going to watch it. It has to be, I think, between 30 and 90 seconds. It has to be, and it has to be engaging. What are they going to say in this video? It's going to be
So it'll be a soundbite.
It'll be a soundbite, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like on a radio news bulletin, for example. They only play the soundbites, because that's what people want to hear. So it's very rare that we would have a 9-10 minute interview up unless it was a really compelling interview that we've done. Normally we find that the shorter the video, the more traction it gets. But I would stress that it really is content led. It can really be. I remember going to a press conference once where Mick Wallace, the Independent TD, got in a row with a journalist, and I filmed that and put it up, and it got thousands of hits. But that was content led. If Mick Wallace had just answered questions in a normal way, nobody would have watched it. But so it's all about what's the content, what are you filming, that's going to attract people to reading it.
Okay, very good. I'm going to throw it open to the floor. We just start.
You mentioned just at the beginning talking about competition and competitors that are out there. And I suppose in the last maybe 12 months or so, a lot of the newspapers have been trying to drive their online versions at the moment.
Yeah.
What does that mean for people like the Journal.ie who are solely an online kind of development?
It's good. It's good to have competition, and it's good that the competition are upping their game because that means that we up our game, and that we're conscious of that. At the beginning when we first came into the market, we really shook it up and we really annoyed a lot of people. But then they kind of copped on to the fact that people actually
really aren't buying a newspaper anymore, so we have to think about what kind of content we're delivering online. And so, like, I freely admit that, you know, the Independent and the Irish Times have been doing some really good stuff with online, and RTE as well, with their vast resources, have also been, they just recently had a website redesign, and I think they're going to be launching a new app as well. And I think that's good, because I think it's good to have competition. I mean, I think for a newspaper journalist at the moment, it's really challenging out there, because there's a pressure, and it's partly because of us, to get the story out there online as quickly as possible. But then they have to be thinking, well, how am I going to take that story on for the newspaper tomorrow? You know, my editor's going to want a different line on that story for the morning, or a different angle from that story for the morning. You know, I have to write maybe 400 words for online now, but then I have to write maybe 600 or 800 words for the paper in the morning, so I have to write 2 stories. I don't have to do that, and like, thank God, because I think that's a real challenge for newspaper journalists at the moment, and I think it's going to be an increasing challenge. I mean, the only thing I'd say is that I just don't know if newspapers are going to be around forever. I think that, you know, news organisations like the Irish Times and the Irish Independent, I think will always be around, but the way we consume them won't necessarily be going in and paying our $2.20 for the newspaper. We might be paying for an online app or something like that, or for a tablet, you know, for a tablet app or something like that. It's the delivery of news and the way we consume news is changing. But, you know, newsrooms around the country will remain. You know, it's more challenging out there for journalists now than ever before, because, as I said, you have to think about, how am I going to deliver the story for online? And, you know, do I need to have video content, or do I need to have picture content, and things like that? And there's more pressure, because there's a need to get it out there and to get it up on the web as quickly as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, well, obviously you said online journalism is getting very big, and there's like, and it's getting more and more important. I think we're all just looking into our future and what we're going to do and what we want to specialize in. Would you say there's more of a future in online journalism than in other kinds of media right now? Or?
I'd say that, like, I mean, there are opportunities across journalism. Like, I know there are newspapers in this country that are hiring right now. But they're hiring because they think that we need to be conscious both of our print product, because that's ultimately where they probably make most of their money, but also that we need to be thinking about online. I think that online is kind of, some people kind of put it in a silo and say this is online, TV, radio, and print, where what's happening is there's more convergence. There's you know, people who report for RTE will have to think about what, you know, I know reporters in RTE will have to think about what's my radio package going to be, what am I going to do for the TV, for the 6-1 News, and I need to file a bit of copy for online, or is there a picture that I need to tweet, or things like that. So, I mean, I think there are opportunities across the board. There aren't as many as there used to be. Like, it's not the best time in the world to be going out there, but I think it's actually a bit better than perhaps when I got into it a couple of years ago, I think, because the economy is picking up and things like that. So, as I said, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a case of there are more opportunities online and less opportunities in radio and TV. I think there's just opportunities in media, but you have to be, you know, more aware of the fact that people will want journalists who can do a bit of video if they need to, or, you know, can take a decent picture.
To be all around.
To be an all-rounder, yeah. It's not as easy as it used to be, but that's kind of the reality of it. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that you still read the papers every morning. I mean, is there any particular reason for that? Do you get something from the kind of the newspaper medium that you can't get from the online platform?
Well, I mean, if I could, I'd read all the newspapers online. So, I mean, like, before it had its huge redesign, the Irish Times used to, I think at 4 AM in the morning, just throw all of the content in its newspaper onto their website. And it was pretty difficult to kind of get around, but I used to try and do it, like, because I just, like, first of all, I'd be up at 6:30 in the morning, there wouldn't necessarily be a shop open or nearby that I could get out to, so I tried and read it online. I mean, there's still a value to picking up a newspaper, like in real, like, I mean, the Mail, for example, the Irish Daily Mail is a very successful newspaper, like a print edition newspaper. And, you know, I pick that up most days to have a read because it's good paper, you know, it's got some good stories in there. So it's really a case of, like, you know, just what can I kind of easily view online, and what do I actually have to go to the newspaper to find, you know?
Okay. Yeah.
I was just wondering, from looking at some of the articles you have, there's an awful lot of videos, you know, from Sky News, places like that, and it's a very kind of diverse way of kind of, I think, of contributing kind of credit to other news places. I'm just wondering what's your kind of idea in doing that, because it's a fairly selfless thing to do for most news organizations. It's all about having the top line no one else has, but you're very kind of, as you said before, it's about, I think, convergence and linking a lot of kind of mediums together.
If Sky News, I mean, I'm can you give me some examples?
Well, I just saw it literally just in the video.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the 30 days explainer, I mean, obviously, like,
YouTube videos.
yeah, YouTube videos and stuff like that. I mean, that was kind of added as an element of kind of just reminding people, say, for example, when Lehman Brothers went, I mean, that's a clip of a breaking news clip from Sky News of the moment that it was announced that Lehman Brothers had gone under and the whole financial world was going to cave in. And it was just kind of reminding people of that moment, like, so it's kind of a hat tip to that report at the time. I mean, another example is there was a helicopter, I think, that crashed in Seattle yesterday, and someone had uploaded a video. So I mean, like, if someone's on the scene and taking a video, then I think that, you know, if we've obtained permission, or if it's on YouTube and it's freely embeddable and things like that, as long as we credit back to them, I think it enhances the story. You know, I think it's an acknowledgement that, you know, we don't have a reporter in Seattle. So we have to be conscious of you know, what people are finding from there, what people are reporting from that scene, and giving them an appropriate credit.